Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sunday Matinee. We're on episode 12. Though, once you know what this episode is going to be about, I'd really kind of call it 11.5. Yeah, we'll start out with some intro and some housekeeping. First off, I would like to introduce everyone to my lone panelist this evening. Joining me for the first time, Zack Jennison.
Hey, y'all. Nice to be here. Glad to be here. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be very fun. I've wanted you to be on the show for a while now, and I missed you on the Thing episode. That was definitely one I was eager to get you on, but life happens. So before we get into the news here, as per usual, if you're watching this on YouTube, which is the only way you can watch it, congratulations, you found us. Subscribe, like, do all the things. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/truthinfilm, on Twitter at Sunday_matinee. And I think that's everything I'm on, unless someone's been secretly sharing my material. So who knows? So yeah, let's get into the news here really quick. First, two things, kind of sad things today. Very early this morning, news broke that David Prowse, who of course played Darth Vader in the original Star Wars trilogy, under the suit. James Earl Jones, of course, did the voice, and was it Sebastian Shaw was the face of Darth Vader there at the very end. But David Prowse was the man inside the costume. Passed away this morning, so it's another sad day for Star Wars fans. 85. So he made it quite a ways. But
GG, dude.
Yeah.
85.
But it's been a rough couple years with Carrie Fisher. Just 4 years back. Was Peter Mayhew this year? He was either this year
or late last year.
He was this year or last year. So it's been a lot of the great Star Wars actors this year. So, and we talked a little bit last week about Chadwick Boseman and Black Panther. So today would have been Chadwick Boseman's 44th birthday. And on Disney Plus, they changed the little Marvel logo intro at the beginning of Black Panther.
Really?
To basically just showcase him like all over it, and it's wonderful. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, just hop onto like either Marvel Studios Twitter or their Facebook or wherever, and they've got the short video of that little logo intro. It's very nice. It's a nice touch. So if you're able to watch Black Panther on Disney Plus, that's wonderful. I can do that. I've still got my Blu-ray, so I've got the old version, but I think it's really cool. I think it's just a nice tribute. So that all happened today, and in the last week, we've had some interesting developments on a couple movies. Number one being Mads Mikkelsen has reportedly replaced Johnny Depp as Grindelwald in the Fantastic Beasts series. If it's true, I think he's a good choice to play a villain. I didn't watch the last Fantastic Beasts, but he's got a good track record, obviously, for playing villains with Casino Royale and Doctor Strange. So I think he'd be a pretty good fit in this series as a villain.
Yeah, when I heard that, I got really excited because I really like Mads Mikkelsen. I loved him in Rogue One, and just having recently played through Death Stranding earlier this summer. He is one of the main characters. Cliff was incredible. The whole cast of that. I mean, to be honest, Norman Reedus notwithstanding, I'm not a huge Norman Reedus fan, but Mads Mikkelsen in that, and Leah Seydoux was great in that, and she was in what Bond movie?
Spectre.
That's right. She was great as what was her name? I'm blanking on her name.
In Spectre or in the game?
In the game. Silent? I don't know. But yeah, Mads Mikkelsen is a cool choice. I'm excited to see what he does. I mean, again, we didn't really see that character in the Is Big movie, which was the second one. So it'll be interesting to see how they transition. Like, do they address that he looks different or not? It's always interesting when
Yeah.
movies have to do that. Like, I was thinking of when I looked at the itinerary, I was thinking of the transition from Batman Begins to Dark Knight, in which the character of Rachel switches actresses from Katie Holmes to Maggie Gyllenhaal. Um, so I'm interested to see if like how they handle it, because I mean, even just from the first Fantastic Beasts, obviously a huge production budget, and it looked really great. So I'm sure that'll have something cool worked out for it.
Yeah. So let's see. So another news, Netflix reportedly was offering, speaking of Warner Brothers, they were looking to pay 200 million to Warner for the streaming rights for Godzilla versus Kong. Probably looking to get it out onto streaming platforms since it's been delayed several times due to, as per usual, the pandemic. So Warner apparently turned them down, which is now fueling rumors that it's going to land on HBO Max, which seems very likely, as Warner just announced that Wonder Woman's going to land there on Christmas Day, and that the Justice League Snyder Cut will also debut there. For me, the downside to this, of course, is that is one movie I absolutely do want to see, along with Wonder Woman. I want to see that on a big screen for sure.
Yeah.
And also, I said last week, I have a free 14-day trial for HBO Max that I'm going to save for Wonder Woman, but not knowing when Godzilla versus Kong might debut, it'll probably run out if that is the reality.
They would do that strategically.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I want to hang on to HBO Max. I've already got. There's too many streaming services right now, and it's too many streaming services. And as we're going to talk about, since tonight's episode is, spoiler, going to be a little bit more about video games, also too many video game subscription services that I have to deal with right now. So, why ditch cable if you're just going to have to keep paying more and more for all these different services?
For everything you forget that you subscribe to. Yeah. I'm interested in the choice to say it might land on HBO Max. I almost feel like at this point, maybe they're thinking, what if we could release it in May? Like, what if we could actually guarantee it would open in 1,000 theaters in May? Like, is that worth holding it back instead of streaming it? Because, we've seen it with several movie studios now where they kind of say, oh, we're going to have it out at this time. No, we're going to have it out this time. Actually, let's just stream it. And I'm interested to see where the decision lies of how much money do they think they would make releasing it at all in theaters versus streaming on a subscription service versus selling it like day one digitally for $19.99 or $14.99.
I think the true litmus test for this was Tenet, which I know Warner had lowered their expectations for ticket sales, obviously, but based on just how many movies they keep delaying or moving to streaming services, I don't know how ready they are to delay too many things much longer. It's really all going to depend, I think, on how fast we can get some of these vaccines out to the general public.
Yeah.
Now that we're hearing a lot more about that, because we talk about this on the show every week. We just want to get back into movie theaters real bad, because it was fun to see Tenet at the drive-in, but like I would have rather seen it, just down the road at my theater.
Well, yeah, because part of the experience of going to the theater is being among other people, and when you see Captain America get the hammer, it's like the whole theater is like, yes. And granted, I mean, no spoilers about The Mandalorian at this point, but I mean, when things happen in like a show like that, or in like Game of Thrones, when Jon Snow blocks the White Walker's thing, it's like you can get up and cheer in your living room and it's fun, but like being in a theater with hundreds of other people watching any Star Wars movie but the most recent one, it's like, just such a fun experience. And for me, I also just think like all these theaters that you and I go to or we enjoy going to because they're, not the most giantest and most expensive or whatever. It's like all these are on the brink of going out of business. And I just want to find a way to ensure that they can stick around.
Um, well, I will tell you, this has come up before with my friends from Tacoma. The Grand is still selling popcorn curbside.
Mm.
So, and they have a virtual showroom where they can show some independent stuff. So they're still, you know, in a
Figuring it
sense,
out.
operating. But like, yeah, the big chains like the Regal can't do stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, because, the movies they expect to be showing are all the big things. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how it all comes back when it does. Um, so here we go. Speaking of HBO, uh, this week Joss Whedon left his co-writer director position on the HBO show The Nevers, basically citing this project, was finally getting too big for him and exhaustion, and he's ready to move on to other things. It's a what the article I read on comingsoon.net mentioned that it's unclear regarding whether or not this has anything to do with the potential struggles he's going to be dealing with facing the allegations from I can't remember the name of the actor, but on just Ray Fisher on Justice League,
Mm-hmm.
who brought forth allegations of misconduct by Joss Whedon on the set of the reshoots, and that was enabled by executives at Warner. So that's going to be an interesting thing to follow up on because Joss Whedon has kind of had a meteoric rise that kind of peaked with the first Avengers film and has kind of fallen from grace after
Yeah.
that. Him, leaving Marvel and also just not getting like he had I think it was a Batwoman or a Batgirl film in development with DC that has kind of fallen off the radar.
Did he do
So
something with Justice League?
he did the reshoots
He did the
after Zack
reshoots
Snyder
after Zack
left.
Snyder left. We're at this point now, and I don't know anything about these allegations against Joss Whedon or anything, but it can't be, no matter who you are, it can't be easy to see, so many people so excited for the Snyder cut and like, oh, they're finally fixing what Joss Whedon messed up. And, it can't be easy on someone to think like, I actually thought I did okay on this and to get like constant rebuke. And we see that so much. Like, I was just thinking of the actress that plays Rose Tico in Last Jedi,
Kelly Marie Tran.
and in Skywalker, and she's great. She was great in those. Like the character necessarily wasn't super well written, whatever. You can have problems with those movies. She was great in it, and she had a giant part in The Last Jedi. And to have her face so much backlash and like barely have anything in in Rise of Skywalker, um, I think all of us can take a little step back and consider that all these entertainers are people too, and um, if we can handle everything with a little more grace, I think we'll be a little better off.
Yep, I agree. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, and see how that goes. HBO is still looking to get the Nevers up and on the air sometime next year.
Is that based on something? Is that from
I don't
something? The
think so.
Nevers?
It sounds like it's going to be about sort of like a group of people in Victorian England who discover they have these sort of weird powers. So
Okay.
I'm of course I love that concept. It sounds a little bit like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I could always stand for them to do a sort of better version of that for film or television.
Yeah.
Um, so last in the news, this last week, Paramount released the first teaser. I think this is just cute of Clifford the Big Red Dog, which is set to release next November. Zach and I are both old enough to remember those books. I know it was
Absolutely.
also a TV series on PBS. I think it's funny that this one's going to become a film. And if you're out there on the internet world, if you actually just look at it, it's like it really just looks like a big dog. It doesn't look too much like the cartoon, but it's like, okay, it should be interesting.
Yeah, I'm interested because Clifford obviously is drawn very cartoony, and he was in a cartoon and he's very goofy. And obviously it's a giant red dog, but it's just an interesting take to look at it and be like, okay, did they just like film a real dog and then like paint over it red? Like it just doesn't have as much character. I'm interested to see what it is. I don't care. It's gonna be fine. Like it's gonna be like all of those, one CG character in a real world, it'll work out. It'll be fine.
Yep.
Clifford.
So that's our news here for the week. Let's get down to the real meat and potatoes that we're talking about here. So last week, I had Sarah and Dea on the show, and we talked about remakes with movies, and we talked about remakes, reboots, adaptations, and we came up with a whole new category, which is reimaginings. And then the next morning, I watched an episode of the IGN podcast. This is a new show they have called Review Roundup. And they were, and this is about video games. So they were talking about the new PS5 remake, Demon Souls. And it got me thinking, this is something I thought about a little bit. When we hear the word remake in terms of film and television, we kind of have to hold our breath because there are some great remakes out there or adaptations, whatever you want to call them. And there are some genuinely bad ones. And even if they're good, we hold our breath because it's tough to imagine a piece of art that we hold sacred having a completely different spin on it. But when it comes to video games, usually when we hear that a game is going to be remade, it's just, yes, exactly. We jump up, we cheer. It is just the best thing ever. And so the question is, what's the difference between a film remake and a video game remake? Why are we so thrilled about this versus film?
I think I would love the idea that they remade films with as goofy as names as remade games get. Like I just imagine, like, what if they called it like Casablanca the Re-Reckoning, or or Total Recall the Remastered edition.
Oh, that's perfect.
That's from the Red Faction. Red Faction, yep. Guerrilla was the Remastered. And then the Darksiders games, I think, have goofy names. It's interesting to think, yeah, when you mention like a movie remake, like I mentioned Total Recall, like I love the classic with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Total Recall, but then when it's like Colin Farrell's in a remake of Total Recall, you think, here we go again. And I don't know why that is. Is it because in video games we feel like we have some sense of control over the outcome versus like once a Total Recall remake is put in theaters, I have no impact on that. But I can still fight the boss in Demon Souls, even if it's different than it used to be.
I think that actually does have a lot to do with it. We do have, there's a degree of interactivity that comes with video games that you don't get with movies. For one thing, the first thing came to mind when I thought of this was, if a character dies in a movie, you don't go back to the checkpoint and hope that they get to live through that same encounter.
Yeah, you don't get a hit rewind.
It's a linear story in most cases, unless you're, Black Mirror Bandersnatch. But video games, even video games that are linear, like we'll just use a classic that everyone should know, the original Super Mario Brothers, a very linear game. The whole point is to get from point A to point B.
You're always moving left to right.
Always moving left to right. But there's still a variety of ways to get through that game. You can use the warp levels. You could be a 100% player and play through every single level in the game. You might be that kind of person you might be a speed runner. So you're doing these ridiculously amazing tricks that someone like me would just be like, how the hell did you do that? Yeah. So, even with the simplest of games, no one person is going to play them the exact same way. And I'm not saying that every movie is going to feel the exact same way for someone, but we all sit down and watch a film, and that's how films work. And then we interpret it the way we do, but we don't control it any differently, but from person to person.
Mhm.
So that I think that's the difference between video games and movies. So when we get a remake, um, and there are different types of remakes in video games, just as there are different types of remakes in films. Um, we can talk here now about there's a difference. We've got ports, remasters, and then we just have games that are completely remade from the ground up. Um, Ports are super duper simple. They're pretty much just the exact same game brought over to either a new console or onto PC with an emulator,
Yeah.
um, with minor modifications like be able to play it on a new type of controller or up res so that it displays on an HD display,
Yeah.
and
I
that's
would
really it.
ports, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say they're super simple in the fact of like I'm sure there's still a lot of work to do to
Hmm.
get, especially like older games. I'm thinking of even now they're just releasing the original Fire Emblem game, which has never been released in the United States before. They're releasing it like on the Switch digitally next week.
Yeah,
And it's been out for, I don't know, 30 plus years. And to imagine a team going back and translating all of that text from Japanese into English and making it sound right and work right and updating it so it doesn't, I'm sure it's still going to feel old, but I think ports in general, there's this fine line between a port and more of getting into that remake, at least in a visual sense, because I think of like Super Mario 3D All Stars, which we just got recently, and those games like have updated textures, but other than that, they feel exactly the same. They look exactly the same. They don't necessarily run any better. And there are no extras really. There's the soundtracks in the game, but until recently, you couldn't even change the camera controls on them, right?
yeah, and that for me is super frustrating because I play
You play
inverted, which
inverted.
for the movie audience out there, inverted basically means my camera controls are swapped. When I push up, I want the camera to go down. When I push down, I want to go up. I want to control like an airplane.
Like the throttle in an airplane,
Yeah,
right? Throttle.
probably.
Um, but then I think of something like the Crash Bandicoot collection or the Spyro collection, in which they include 3 games. There's a ton more polish, I think, in terms of redoing the graphics. But I also think of that as, does it depend on the original game's textures? Because if you look at like the original Crash, it's pretty muddy. That's kind of going into the ground up remakes, I think, is when they start doing more of those imaginations. And I'm sure you have better examples of those.
Well, I mean, there's even differences between ground up remakes. Like those Crash and Spyro ones were clearly built from the ground up, but they didn't like change the story, or I imagine they didn't change the dialogue. They may have added like a few extra Easter egg bits, because they typically do that.
Yeah.
But those are games that also, again, even though they were built from the ground up, those were done, yeah, again, to look better and to run better, but to feel almost the same.
Mm-hmm. To kind of tap that same nostalgia nerve instead of like necessarily roping in a new audience or transforming people that might not have been into the game before.
And I think we get ports of some games because those games don't necessarily need a remake to improve on the experience. Like really, again, the Super Mario Brothers games on the original Nintendo and Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo, um, those don't need major graphical upgrades
Mm-mm.
at all. They look good. They look really good for the time they were made. They mechanically um, are still play very well,
Yes.
and you don't really need a lot of quality of life improvements in those games. It's nice to have save states
Yeah.
for the original 3 Mario games for the original Nintendo because those games you couldn't save originally. Um, so it's nice to not have to necessarily sit down and play straight through them. But other than that, again, like those games worked perfectly with either a 2 or 4 button, you know, combination.
Yeah.
There are other games that desperately needed a remake from that era. I'm gonna jump into one of my favorite remakes right here, right away, since we're talking about the Nintendo era, because I've played both versions, and that is the original Metroid.
Mm.
And the original Metroid. It's definitely great for 1986, but it is very difficult to go back and play Metroid now because every single sequel, except for maybe Metroid 2 on the Game Boy, which is also
Also
thankfully
a
been
really
remade.
good remake.
Every Metroid game since Super Metroid in the early 90s has had one thing that really makes the games much more bearable, and that is an in-game map.
Yep.
That's also one of the reasons why
you can never imagine going back to a Metroid game without a map anymore.
That's why it's one of the reasons why I've never gotten terribly far trying to play the original Legend of Zelda, is because I need the map. And in that game, every panel looks the same to me. It's so hard. If I had a map, I think I would actually try to get through that game. So that is one of the reasons that to remake a game, is because it's not very. Some games just aren't accessible. So Metroid Zero Mission came along, and it basically uses the same map, but now it's, they've upgraded. Yeah, it was a ground up remake. It was designed in the style of Super Metroid, which was great. Those games look beautiful and sound beautiful. It had a map, and it even had more to the story.
Yeah, I remember that second story part. That was on Game Boy Advance, correct? Metroid Zero Mission. And Metroid Fusion was on Game Boy Advance. Which, when you look back at both of those games, Metroid Fusion, which was a new story, and then Metroid Zero Mission, which was the remake, they both sit so well together on that console, on the Game Boy Advance. And you look back at the original Metroid versus the remake Zero Mission, and Zero Mission is the one in your head, is like the definitive copy, I think, anymore. Which is interesting to think that, we grew up playing the original Metroid and thinking like, this is the best of that game. And then Super Metroid came out and really perfected that. But Zero Mission really took what we loved and appreciated about the Metroid games and like update it to modern sensibilities, which I think is what made it be that iconic version of the game.
Even by today's standards, and we're talking about Metroid Zero Mission was released in 2004. So here we are, almost 17 years later, and it still plays extremely well. The only problem now with it is that it's locked to either the Game Boy Advance or the Nintendo eShop on
the
Wii U.
The Wii.
The Wii U.
Gathering dust. The Wii U gathering dust.
A console which very few people bought, and those people who bought them, very few people kept them.
I had one. I didn't keep it.
So yeah, it's or of course, I'm sure someone has an emulator for PC, but yeah, hush hush. I don't. I still have my Game Boy Advance, so thankfully I can play it whenever I want. But that's a game that I think doesn't necessarily need to be remade again, but I would love for Zero Mission to come to the Switch eShop.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that can be a problem when it comes to video game remakes versus movie remakes. Is that with movie remakes, as long as the versions aren't hidden away because of whatever reason, or you just can't find them to rent them for $2.99 on Amazon, or they're not on Netflix or not on Hulu. It's like you pretty much can watch any version of any movie you want. If there are multiple versions of a movie and you like the original better, then just watch the original if you want to watch that story. Whereas with a video game, sometimes you do get locked on that. Like if I didn't have Nintendo Switch Online and I didn't have an NES, I could not play the original version of Metroid anymore. And that's, I think, where we as video game fans have to kind of consider, when do we want the original versions on everything. Like, we were kind of talking about Game Pass before and how you can access old Xbox games and all that. That's great. But, for some of these games that we grew up playing, like Metroid, like there really isn't the best way to play that like on your big screen TV right now. And so if they remade it so you could play it on Switch, that's great. But I think what we want to make sure of is that, things don't go horribly wrong, because we've seen in the past video game remakes that have gone horribly wrong.
Yep. And I want to talk for a second just about Xbox here. Because Xbox's backwards compatibility is so phenomenal that in a way, it kind of negates the need for remakes of old Xbox games, unless we get to a point where, God forbid, we get to a point where like we look back at like Gears of War 2 and say, the graphics in this game are terrible, which we probably will never do, because even for a game that's that game's 12 years old now and it's still beautiful by today's standards. But like
a lot of bloom. It's the bloom.
Yeah. Remasters are inevitable and usually turn out fine. But like, I think with backwards compatibility, as long as a game is still plays well mechanically and runs well, I don't think we're going to necessarily need to say have a need for another remake of the original Halo ever again.
Yeah, I think the version of the original Halo that you get on Master Chief Collection feels wonderful, because you can either play it in the controls and in the visuals of the original style, which is really neat to kind of switch between, or you can play it with the updated graphics and the updated controls, and it feels just like you're playing, Halo 5 or whatever any of the more recent ones, or hopefully Infinite eventually. It's interesting, I often think of a game that I loved when I was a kid that I wonder if I would love now, would be something like GoldenEye. Because it is like, I remember putting a lot of time in GoldenEye, both on my own, like playing through the story missions repeatedly and trying to, get it on the higher difficulties and unlocking all of the cheats. But then obviously it was like the cool thing to play at every person's house was split screen GoldenEye. And going back and playing that now on Nintendo 64, it is very, very hard to play.
Yep.
It's very hard to move around and aim and shoot, and everything just looks so the same, all the hallways and stuff. And I just wonder, if games that are stuck in that like early 3D graphics era could be remade and the gameplay still feel substantial, I guess.
Well, obviously they can, since like you said, we have Mario 3D All Stars, which has Super Mario 64, which runs just fine on the Switch. Rare managed to bring the original Perfect Dark over to Xbox on the 360, and they were able to just beef it up. It looks basically, they didn't upgrade the graphics or anything, but it got the HD remaster, and they managed to bump up the frame rate significantly so that it can be competing with modern shooters.
That's cool.
I wouldn't say I would still play it over a modern shooter, just because it does lack the refinements that have been made in the 20 years since Perfect Dark released. But
yeah,
it's better than going back and playing it on the N64.
Absolutely, those C buttons, man.
Yeah. Accessibility is a big thing with getting some of these remakes out there. Making sure that everyone can play them, and also just, I think, accessibility in general for more people to play them, period. Modern consoles tend to have more accessibility options in terms of colorblind or just all kinds of great things. And more games are starting to utilize that, which is very important, and which is, I guess that would be a good reason to, at the very least, drop an update for your game.
Yeah.
To give it more accessibility options.
I think in general, I would love for the amount of accessibility options in a game like I've heard Last of Us 2 has some incredible accessibility options. I haven't played that yet. I actually just got it, and I'm hoping to start it this week. Ooh. But even Ghost of Tsushima this year, you could change the size of the subtitles. You could change how big they are. You could change specific aspects of the gameplay in terms of the difficulty. I think wanting to play old games, either that you want to just replay or games that you didn't get a chance to play and want to try out based on a recommendation or whatever. I feel like we should just be at a point where every game should have every accessibility option. And I know this goes into a deeper conversation, especially among like the gaming community, about like difficulty in games like Dark Souls or Sekiro or any of those where they do not have difficulty options. There is not that opportunity in those games. And some people argue that that's important and that's part of what makes those games so special. And some people want, and I just think we should open up any games, because this is not just a hobby. This is something that so many people in the world do. Like, we should make it just this open. It's so much easier to access a movie than a lot of games. I can go on Netflix and find any movie. I can, go on Amazon and find so many movies if I want to rent them or buy them or whatever. And gaming just ends up getting locked so much. Mm-hmm. It just creates a lot of points of almost speed bumps to getting people more into normalizing wanting to play a game and chat over a headset than, I was going to say go to someone's house, but don't go to people's houses right now.
No. And you brought up subtitle sizes in games. And the fact is, with ever since DVD, just the fact that you can watch almost any movie now with subtitles, period, yes, or closed caption, however you want to do it. That's good. That wasn't a thing on good old VHS.
Unless you specifically bought the tape, and they did. It's not like they made those for every movie,
I love that, and that I get that there's competition between Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo, but I do love that when it comes to movies, at least on the physical side, my 4K player will play all my old Blu-rays and all my old DVDs. Thank goodness I don't have to buy a Sony brand 4K player to watch Sony films.
Wow. That's an interesting way to think of that.
That's basically what they're doing for streaming. That's how they're continuing to roll out streaming services. NBC has their own streaming service now. So pretty soon The Office is going to be stuck, and Parks and Rec will be stuck there. Like, everyone who's been depending on Netflix or Prime or whatever to watch all their favorite NBC shows are going to have to go over to Peacock.
Yeah, I was just talking to my mom about that. TV shows that or have watched for a long time, staying on a streaming service for so long and then being switched. And it's almost getting to this point where, I remember when I had to pay my own cable bill, either here, as an adult in my own house, or like among roommates or whatever, like, oh, we want to get this channel and this channel, and we want to be able to watch this and this and this. We need the hugest package because that's the only one that includes all of these. And so people, ever since then, I just remember like talking with friends or with family members, like, I just wish I could pick individual channels and just pay for those. And now we're kind of getting to that point where you really can almost, we have Peacock, we have CBS All Access. Disney Plus is, the ABC and Fox machine. And, we're getting to this point, but it's almost where now it's like, can I just get like a box that shows all of these in one place all the time? Because it's almost like, how many different clicks do I have to go through to get to every application to find a certain TV show or movie or whatever?
Well, we've kind of gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's okay. We do that all the time here. So let's talk some more about some of our favorite video game remakes. So I brought up Metroid. What is one of your favorites?
One of my favorite video game remakes. one that I was thinking of when I read this question was not necessarily like a huge pick, but Ocarina of Time 3D on the DS, on the 3DS. And I think part of that is just that they found ways to use the DS screen that were fun, and just looking at your inventory on your map on a second screen, I thought was just a really cool thing. It reminded me very much of when I originally played Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, and I had this strategy guide for it like in my lap. So I'd be like playing the game, and then I look down at my lap at what the map or how to find the next heart piece. So I actually really like Ocarina of Time 3D on the 3DS. And I actually just started another remake, BioShock Remastered, this week. I consider that one of my favorite games just in general. And playing it now where it's not completely remade, it still is just a little slight graphical upgrade. I was like, oh, I thought like this was so much more intense all the time, you know. But I would say probably Ocarina of Time 3D.
I do love Ocarina, and Majora's Mask 3D is
also really good.
But for me, like this is the silliest thing, but the number one reason that I love Ocarina of Time 3D is the biggest quality of life improvement ever is using the second screen to switch the iron boots and the regular boots on the fly in the water temple.
Yes.
Because back when that game came out in the late 90s, that temple was basically everyone was pausing the game to switch boots, you know, every 30 seconds. So much, which is way too much time to be managing inventory.
In an already stressful dungeon.
Yes.
Yeah. That is such a... See, it is great.
But yeah, and the only problem with porting that over to the Switch at this point is you don't have that second screen, so you can't just switch your boots on the fly. You'd have to figure out a way to create a dedicated button to do it.
Yeah. Played Ocarina of Time on a little Joy-Con.
Oh no, never. One of my absolute favorite, I think Zero Mission might be my absolute favorite, but one of my very favorites of the last couple of years, actually last year, is Resident Evil 2 remake. Resident Evil games they've been ported, they've been given a little bit they don't call them remasters, but like, you know, they've got 4, 5, and 6 on current gen. They're basically remasters. Only 2 games in the series have ever been rebuilt from the ground up, and they're both very good. But two completely changed the way you play the game. It went with the over-the-shoulder camera style that they utilized in first and 4. But at the same time, they actually went with the atmosphere of those old games, and it was a perfect combination. And they streamlined a story that had in some ways worked and some ways didn't. But they also were able to, I think, create the single greatest horror element in the entire franchise by making Mr. X, who appears at random in the original game. Well, not at random. There are scripted moments where he appears. You just have to unload your most powerful weapon into him, drop him, get an ammo refill, and then he'll pop up again later. In this remake, he pops up and you can take him down, but he's going to get back up and follow you. So really your best strategy is just to run and try and lose him. And he is relentless. You know, I figured out the point in the game where you can start breathing freely again when he stops following you. But yeah, for a huge chunk of the game, you basically just have to and it's brilliant. It's the most brilliant thing they could have come up with, and it really changes the way you play the game because now instead of instead of having to say, oh, I can leave the zombies alive in this room and just dodge as much as I can. Well, sometimes you need a free corridor because you're going to be running.
You're going to be sprinting past them.
You're going to be sprinting right past them. I think there was a playthrough where I very foolishly left a liquor, which is a very, very deadly enemy. I let one live, and then I get to the end of the hallway, and Mr. X just busts through the door, and now I have to turn around and run back down the hallway past the
Into the
liquor.
liquor.
And it's like, oh great, the two enemies in the game that can just insta kill you in the same room.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, there were some problems with the way they streamlined the story this time around, but it felt like I was playing it again for the first time.
Yeah. That you saying that again, playing it, kind of reminds me of another video game remake that I played earlier this year. Well, I finished it earlier this year. It came out last fall. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening remake on Switch. I had played this game originally on the Game Boy, the original Game Boy. And then there was the Game Boy Color version, Link's Awakening DX, that added a different dungeon, and obviously it was in color on the Game Boy Color. But the remake on Switch had a really interesting look. It almost looks like you're playing in a toy box, and that kind of made me think of what you said. Makes me feel like I'm playing it for the first time, like playing on a little Game Boy. You're playing with a toy. You're playing with your Game Boy, and now you have your Switch, which is you're still holding it in your hands. I mean, you can play it on your TV too. But then having these little toys for Zelda characters, it was just a really interesting take. And granted that like they preserved the gameplay exactly. Like everything feels exactly the same in terms of your movement and your abilities, which can be somewhat frustrating because there's not like, a fancy map that I can zoom in on and find exactly what I'm looking for. But it preserves the feel of the original game, but presents it in a visually very unique experience. So I really like that one too.
I also played that. I had never played the original, so this was a completely new thing for me. But I could tell that this game had a lot of quality of life improvements in the sense that the Switch, of course, has 4 basic buttons to the Game Boy's 2, which I can only imagine meant that you didn't have to necessarily swap out a lot of things in inventory as much.
That's exactly
this time
right.
around. Because in the remake, it's what, isn't it? It's like the Pegasus boots are mapped to a button, right?
Yep.
And it's like, that's great. That is awesome.
Yeah. It's very similar to, talking about Ocarina of Time and having to go into your inventory to switch the iron boots and switch them off. Very similar to that, where it's like, wow, it's so convenient to be able to access my inventory quickly.
And you said it was a little inconvenient not having a map you could zoom in on, but I still liked the overworld map that it existed. And it helps that versus the original Legend of Zelda, this game is so detailed that you know where you're at any given time.
It has landmarks. It has a lot of landmarks.
So it's very easy to navigate. I'm out of great remakes that I've played. I'm partway through 2016 Doom, which is kind of a reboot.
Yeah, that's way different than I was playing the original Doom and I'm like, wow, this is way different. There's no like metal like jamming in my ears.
Do you have any other like great highlights for remakes?
I mean, one thing that I just want to say about remakes is that I'd said this earlier, but I'm looking through a list here, and there are games that you hear people talk about that I've never played, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, or I've never played Resident Evil 3. And I think in general, like just for people that want to experience those games, or talking with people that have loved Final Fantasy VII for 23 years and now it's pretty hard to go back to an original PlayStation game, but it's new and it's on the PS4 and it looks really cool. And I just love that idea, like just giving more people the chance to experience something important and something cool and potentially something that will be their new favorite. I think any way we can just kind of expand that is cool. It's fun.
And I also am not a big Final Fantasy person. So I played 7 for like an hour. I borrowed a friend's PlayStation for it. And but looking back on my experience with it now, I will say like, and this applies to a lot of video games from that era. I will say, oh my gosh, how did we think that these were the best looking games
Yeah.
from 1997?
Yeah.
GoldenEye is a good one. Like, oh my god, we all thought GoldenEye was like the epitome of realism in video games,
And
and
their
now
faces are like flat.
so yeah. For people to be able to experience Final Fantasy VII, and for the old players to have it feel like they did back then, is great. And for new players to come in and say, "Oh my gosh, this is that story I've heard about for years," it is. It's great. Again, I don't think every game should be remade. There are even games from that era, PlayStation and 64. Like again, Ocarina of Time, I don't necessarily think needs that ground up remake.
Mm-hmm.
Because it still plays well, and just keep smoothing out the textures a little bit every time. We'll be good.
Absolutely. Give us a few more pixels.
So let's jump to what are they're very few, I find, which is why we get excited about remakes for video games more so than movies. But what are those very few underwhelming remakes that we've experienced?
Recently I had really been looking forward to, and I had, you and I had texted about it too, the Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning remake or remaster called Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. And wow, like I love that game on 64 on the 360. I played through it all. I remember really enjoying the story and the characters and the gameplay and the way it looked. And going into this remaster in which the graphics are just pretty much the same, they're just HD textures. And the gameplay just feels so clunky compared to a lot more modern third-person games in general, The Witcher, or Breath of the Wild, or Sekiro. It was so hard to play, and on top of that, I played for like 2 hours the first day. And I was like, "This is weird. I'm not getting any achievements." And then, like 2 days later, they tweeted and they're like, "Some people didn't get achievements for like the first couple missions. If you want them, you got to replay it." It's like, I don't even know if I'm going to replay it. And I haven't done it since. But that's just one that I'm sure I'll try and go back into some night and just mess around with. But wow, it feels too similar and too old, I guess, at this point compared to more modern third person or RPGs.
So my big one, and really the only one I have that I've actually played. I've got another one I want to talk about, but the big one for me is I think it's kind of funny, and I don't think this is a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but I spoke super highly of Resident Evil 2 and was super hyped about this time a year ago when they announced they were doing Resident Evil 3 remake. Thought, oh great, I've only played through 3 like twice, the original. It's not my favorite of the originals, but it's got some great moments, and it's got the Nemesis, which is definitely what they modeled the new Mr. X and the 2 remake after, with that relentless
He's
chasing.
kind of an iconic villain,
the
Nemesis in Resident Evil 3.
And I get it, I play it, and I absolutely agree with the criticisms. And it's crazy to agree with this criticism nowadays because most games I feel are too long. This game was too short. It is definitely a sub 10-hour game. But most importantly, I watched a playthrough of the original again after beating it because I thought, okay, I still enjoyed this, but I know there's something missing. I just know it. I just can't remember what it is. And there's this very fun sequence you play in the original Resident Evil 3 where you go inside a clock tower and you have to solve all these puzzles and there are zombies everywhere. And Resident Evil 3 is different from the first 2 games in that a lot of it takes place outside. It's still kind of claustrophobic, but it's less claustrophobic than being inside the Spencer Mansion in the first game or the police department in the second game. And that clock tower section is definitely more reminiscent of the first 2 games than the entire rest of the game. So it's like, oh, cool. In 3 Remake, you get to the clock tower and you have this big outdoor boss battle with the Nemesis, and you're done. And you move on to like the next beat of the story.
What? No puzzles? No.
No puzzles,
no zombie filled puzzle rooms.
and it is it's crazy. It's definitely it's not a bad boss fight, but it does feel like they were inspired a bit more by the action heavy stuff in Resident Evil 5 and 6 for this particular boss fight.
Mm.
Um, and they actually have a very, very similar rehash of this boss fight later on in the game, but with mechanics that actually make it interesting rather than just shoot it.
Bullet sponge, go.
But it's tough to say that the best parts of Resident Evil 3 Remake are the parts where he plays Carlos and not Jill, the protagonist. Because Carlos actually gets to play in the police station from Resident Evil 2. So you're back in that crazy enclosed space with liquors. Then
Nightmare
you bring liquors.
Palace.
Yeah. And right after the clock tower scene, you go to a hospital and Jill is incapacitated and you have to place Carlos again. And the hospital again, close quarters. The hunter monsters are in the hospital. So like the scariest parts of the game, you're not even playing as Jill. And the Nemesis does chase you the way that the Tyrant does, or Mr. X rather does in 2, but it just doesn't have that same loop. You're not stuck inside a building with him. You're outside.
Yeah, you got a little more home on the range there.
Yep.
A lot more grazing space.
It's a lot more scripted events with Nemesis. Whereas with Mr. X, it was like, you never know when you're going to run into him.
Just like the Kool-Aid Man.
Exactly. He does. I'm pretty sure that's a meme. So yeah, it plays just like 2. So I'm glad for that. But it cut too much out of the original experience. It also cut the only other boss from the original Resident Evil 3 that wasn't the Nemesis. So that was kind of a letdown. But, there's that. One I want to mention again that I never played, but that I just heard didn't quite hold up was, we already talked about GoldenEye. It got remade in 2012. Released on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and the Wii.
What?
Yeah, this was when the license was at Activision, and I can't remember who developed it, but they would have done well to put like any one of their Call of Duty teams on it, because they probably would have made a good game.
Get me a Wiimote and let me play some GoldenEye.
But yeah, I think it banked a little too much on the GoldenEye name, because that general era of Bond video games was pretty underwhelming.
Well, hopefully with IO Interactive,
yes,
a new one, we'll be branching into a new era here. Could be really fun.
First, I think it's actually GoldenEye might have been before 2012, but as I recall, the last James Bond game was 2012. So it's been a long time since we've had a James Bond video game, and we desperately need a good one. The last good one is probably like Nightfire or something like awesome. That on the original Xbox and PS2
and GameCube and PC.
Can't ever discount the PC, even though you and I hardly ever.
I played that on PC. Nightfire.
Nice.
Love the multiplayer.
Do you have any other underwhelming remakes?
I'm trying to think of any, and I can't off the top of my head. There are games that have now been like remade that are, again, they walk that fine line. I have my Star Wars poster right here on the wall, so I'm like thinking, is there a Star Wars game? And then I remember, oh yeah, there's Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which was the very first game I had on Nintendo 64. I got the package with Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Loved that game, beat it, got all the pod racer parts and all that, and then now it's out on all last gen consoles. And I bought it on Switch, and it's like, oh, this will be really fun. But I don't know if they just didn't update too much of the graphics, or the gameplay is just really bad from what I remember it being. But it's like, it just feels really slow. And I think part of that is just like compared to a game like Forza Horizon 3 or 4, when you can like see all of Australia or whatever, that you really get a real sense of speed. And in a less graphically intense game, it's a lot harder to get that sense of speed. But I would say that is one that I was like, man, I kind of wish they would have just like, what if they like updated the graphics and made it really fancy looking? Like that'd be so cool to have a new Star Wars Episode 1 racer. So, you know,
I feel like the games from that era that have translated well to modern consoles, and when I say modern, I'm gonna say like, this last decade, um, are platformers. Because we already talked again about Super Mario 64. Banjo Kazooie and Tooie both play very well on Xbox.
Oof. Yeah, through Rare Replay, or you can just buy them off the Xbox Marketplace
or Game Pass.
That's right.
Those didn't get a massive graphical upgrade, but they got, you know, smoother textures, and blah blah blah. So yeah, we're gonna jump ahead here. I just want to cover this real quick since we're a movie show. Movies get licensed to be games a lot.
Yes, they do.
And we're going to skip the bad ones because let's just say right now, there are a lot of bad ones. Why are there a lot of bad ones? Probably because they try to release the game to coincide with the release of a movie or a television show.
A cash grab.
Cash grab. Developers don't have really any time to really make something good out of it. Rare exceptions, and these are almost all games that don't coincide with the release of a movie. GoldenEye, again, it was good when it released in 97.
It's true.
2 years after the movie. Shadow of Mordor, which is a Lord of the Rings game.
Yeah.
The recent Spider-Man games from Insomniac on PlayStation are both excellent.
2018 and 2020.
Yep. Batman Arkham Asylum. Probably the best Batman game ever.
Yeah, I would agree. Arkham Asylum.
And the recent Jedi Fallen Order is one of the better Star Wars games in the last couple of years.
That game's great. One that you didn't mention, a licensed game that I actually really do enjoy Jedi Fallen Order. I really, really love Arkham Asylum. And Shadow of Mordor is really great too. Maybe my favorite licensed game would be on the original Xbox, The Chronicles of Riddick, Escape from Butcher Bay. What a wonderful single-player first-person game. It definitely feels dated when you play it now. Like just the first-person look is really interesting in that game. And it's certainly like, still an original Xbox game. And they did update its graphics when they put it on 360 with the sequel Dark Athena. But I think in general, like taking the feel of like the pitch black movie and Chronicles of Riddick of this like really interesting sci-fi world that may or may not be interpreted that well at all. But in the game, like there were so many cool quests and so many varied areas that is definitely a licensed game that I consider to be actually really great and maybe better than the movies.
I've also played that. I actually borrowed it from you, the Dark Athena disc. And I've only seen the first Pitch Black movie, which I think is great, but those two games are also incredible. I hope they're backwards compatible and playable right now because that would be a fun one to jump back into.
Yeah, I would love to play those again.
So we've got to wrap up here in just a minute. So closing thoughts, I'm just going to say, the difference between movie remakes and video game remakes really does have to do with interactivity. And when it comes to games, old games, less accessible, or they need that fresh coat of paint, or that complete mechanical overhaul if you want people to get back into that. Whereas you don't need to do that with movies. If a movie is good, it is good, and will always be good. Give it a nice 4K upgrade for your streaming service or for your 4K disc, absolutely. But that's my thought on that.
Yeah, one thing I wanted that we're kind of touching on there, like thinking of movie remakes and how we consider them. it makes me think of in Star Wars when we had the re-releases of the original trilogy in theaters in the 90s. And now any version of Star Wars you watch that's a new version, the newest version would be what's released right now on Disney Plus. And they've altered like dialogue and characters and some different stuff in different looks in the movies, and they're fine. Like, I think video game remakes and movie remakes, they're always going to be fine. They might not be that great. They might have things you don't like in them, but for the most part, like, I think just the act of creating things is important, and people created these remakes and are trying to, kind of tap into people's favoritism or their nostalgia or whatever. And so any way we can, I don't know, just be more creative, either by making original ideas or kind of reinterpreting things so new people can experience it, I think is a worthy endeavor.
My only counterpoint to Star Wars is I wish that they would make the original theatrical cuts accessible to
Absolutely.
audiences.
Wouldn't it be so cool if, like, when you buy a digital copy of Star Wars, you can click on it and it says, do you want to watch the 1977 version? Do you want to watch the 1999 version? Do you want, kind of like how if I go on Spotify, it's like, oh, I can look for the original album or the remaster or the re-release or the re-recording, let us see all those versions. It's cool.
If Blade Runner has taught us anything, it's that movie fans will buy up the version with a billion cuts on it.
It's true.
All right. So the last thing we're going to do here is trivia. So Zach, you know exactly what you're going into here. So I'm just going to jump right in. So this is going to be very relevant to tonight's episode here. So of the following films directed by visionary auteur Uwe Boll,
what a title.
Which has the lowest rating on Rotten Tomatoes?
Oh,
is it A, Blood Rain, B, Alone in the Dark, C, Blood Rain 2, Deliverance, or D, In the Name of the King, A Dungeon Siege Tale?
Oh God, I saw that last one in theaters. I'm going to guess B, In the Name of the King.
D?
Wait, what was B?
B was Alone in the Dark.
Alone in the Dark.
You're going to guess Alone in the Dark?
I'm going to guess Alone in the Dark. I'm going to go B, Alone in the Dark.
Well, Zach, unfortunately, it is Blood Rain 2.
No!
However, I will say, this was tough in the sense that if you actually look at all these films' scores, none of them is double digits. They are all under 10%. Blood Rain 2 is actually the lowest at 0.
The coveted 0.
But Alone in the Dark, I think, was at 1%.
Oh,
like I think Blood Rain 1 is the highest on this list at like 6%.
Wow.
Yeah, like I said, visionary auteur Uwe Boll. Some great films out there.
Oh, jeez.
I don't think he has a single fresh film. So, gosh, that's our show for the night. Thank you everyone for watching and entertaining me with this deviation from the usual look at film. But when you're talking about remakes, it gets, you can't just factor out video games, because movies and video games are like the two biggest types of media that do get remade. You don't see a lot of books get remade unless they happen to be Pride and Prejudice and zombies. So Zach, thank you for joining me tonight. Hopefully we'll see you again, and hopefully next year I'll just get to hang out with you again.
We can do this in person.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Heaven forbid.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah. So on that note, everyone, have an excellent night. Stay home, stay safe, mask up.
Happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays.
Yes.